guys, welcome back to the Rhinestone Realtor. So today I wanted to sit down and talk to y'all about some of the top 12 real estate lingo / terminology that we use in the business. I know a lot of people who don't do real estate day in and day out sometimes don't understand these different terms. So I figured we'd walk through it, that way you can look nice and educated with your home buying process. So the first one is an appraisal. So when you are getting a loan on a property or just want to make sure that it's worth at least what you're paying for it, you're going to get an appraisal on it. So the lender or yourself as a buyer will send out an appraiser out to the property, and they're going to go out and check it out, see all the different features, if it has quartz countertops, if it has bamboo wood floors, if it has a pool or a fence, or is it on a lake, is it back up to a road, all the different features of the house, and they're going to pull comps or other sold houses in the area that are very similar to the house. Usually they get about three to six of them to come up with a value for your home, and they write up a report, and that report is called an appraisal. That is sent to the lender to make sure that the house is worth what you're paying for it, and hopefully a little bit more. That way you have a little bit of equity in your pocket. The next thing is a buyer's agent or a listing agent or a seller's agent. These terms get thrown around pretty loosely. So a buyer's agent is a realtor or broker who is going to represent the buyer solely. That means that they work for the buyer, they're doing everything in their best interest for the buyer, and they're going to negotiate on behalf of the buyer. So they're going to be coordinating with title company and lender and the inspector and the buyer and the listing agent to make sure that everything gets done on time and efficiently. Now, a listing agent or a seller's agent is the agent who works for the seller, typically exclusively, and they are the ones who go in. They get the listing agreement to list the property. They go in and take photos. They also coordinate between the buyer's agent and the title company and the lender to make sure that the seller's best interests are represented during the term of the transaction. So there are sometimes that an agent can work for both the buyer and the seller. I'm not going to get into that because different states have different rules. But typically you want to have your own agent representing yourself and not share one with the other party. That way you know that you have somebody who's there solely for your best interest. Now the next terminology is a contract. That feels self-explanatory, but I figured I'd touch on it as well. Now in Texas, if you are buying a single family home, so that means just a regular brick and stone house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, typically with a garage, that's not connected to another unit, so not a duplex or a townhome or a multifamily, 4-plex, that kind of thing. You are going to use a 1-to-4 contract. That's going to be a 16-page document that goes through and lines out every single item dealing with the transaction. So that means who the parties are, who's the seller, who's the buyer, what's the sales price, what's the down payment, what type of financing are that you using, what is the option period, what's the financing contingency, are there any is there any property, like personal property, being sold with the house. It's going to go through it and line out every single one of those things. Who pays for title escrow fees, who pays for this, who pays for that. It is exactly what you go to if there's ever a question during the term of the contract. Now, once you're at the end of the contract, you're going to go to closing. Now, there are closing costs associated with closing. Get it? Closing costs. Super simple, right? So closing costs are typically the recording fees to record the deed and the note with the county. There are recording fees, there are doc preparation fees, there are attorney fees, because attorneys look at all these documents and make sure that nothing's like out of place and looks kind of funky. There are escrow fees. So there's the escrow officer who works for a title company. The title company is the one who, if you break it down very simply, makes sure that the person who says they're selling the house is the one who actually owns the house, who actually can sell the house to the new buyer. So there are fees associated with that and coordinating with HOA transfer fees and whatnot. So closing costs typically are 2 to 3% of the sales price, and that can be negotiated between the parties who pays what. But that is, on average, what you will see for those types of things. Next is a contingency. So there are a few different contingencies that you can use in real estate. There's a contingency upon sale of current property. So if you own a house right now and you want to buy another house, but you can't afford the mortgage on both of them, what you would do is you would put an offer on the new house with the contingency of the sale of your current house. Now, this is something that we haven't seen very often here in the Houston area, just because it's been such a hectic market. A lot of people are just getting in, getting out, getting it done clean, and not using that contingency. But it is out there, and people do use it. There's always the inspection contingency, also known as an option period. So that is when you have a few days to get out there, inspect the property, make sure it looks good, make sure there's no major repairs that you aren't aware of. And with that, you have the option to get out of the contract with no penalties. Typically that contingency is up to 10 calendar days. There's also a financing contingency to make sure that you're still approved to get a loan on the house. That's typically about a 3-week process from the time you execute a contract. So those are 3 of the main contingencies. But basically it's saying, hey, I'm gonna buy the house, but I want this option as a way to get out for a fee or not, is the easiest way to explain that. Next is due diligence. So that's also kind of what happens during the option period. So during due diligence, that's when you're gonna go in and make sure that you know every single thing to know about that house. You're gonna know how old the roof is, how old the AC is, what type of floors they are, have there been any plumbing issues, have there been any electrical issues, is there a transfer fee if you're buying a house on a golf course? Had that one come up and that was terrible. You're going in and you're just inspecting every little inch of that house and contract, because you want to make sure that you know what you're getting into. No one wants to have a $25,000 transfer fee to buy a house and a golf course just pop up at the end of closing after a month. Whew, that was not fun. So that's when you go in and you just basically research as much as possible. You hire professionals. You don't do this yourself. That is why there are so many different professions in the real estate business. But that's when you definitely have the opportunity to get in and know everything about the house. Next things are 2 different fees that you have at the beginning of a contract. There are option fees and earnest money fees. So the option fee is typically $10 a day to have that option to get it out of the contract. So if you have a 10-day option period where you're inspecting the property, you want the option to get out, you will write a $100 check to the seller to say, hey, thank you for the opportunity to inspect the house. Here's a little bit of fees to take it off the market. I'm going to do my due diligence so that we can move forward. So that is something that is typically non-refundable, but it is credited at closing, but that's something you can negotiate. There's also earnest money, and that is typically about 1% of the sales price, and that is a check or cashier's check sent to the title company to open title. That is there just as a show of good faith to say, hey, I want to buy this house, I intend to buy this house, and here's some money to get things started. That price is also negotiable, and that is credited at closing, and I won't go into that. There's a lot of contingencies, but basically it's a good faith, like, hey, I want to move forward. We'll stick to that. Escrow. So escrow is the whole process of once you have an executed contract, the minute both parties have signed and it's been delivered to both parties, to the time it's closed and funding. That is called the escrow period. That means the house is in transition to transfer parties of ownership. So that's why typically when you work with somebody at the title company, they're called an escrow officer, escrow assistant, meaning they're overseeing this whole transition period. Now, equity. Everybody loves equity, right? That's, money in your pocket, almost. So equity is the difference in what the house is worth and what you owe. For example, if the house is worth $100,000 and you owe $80,000, that means you have $20,000 in equity. So if you're an investor, obviously we want that higher equity, but it's always good to buy a house and put a down payment because that is built-in equity in a house. Inspection, we've kind of already touched on this, but basically you are going to hire an inspector. They are licensed by the state, and they have to do continuing education so that they're aware of all the new building codes. And the inspector is going to come out to the house. They're going to check the appliances, the roof, the AC, the siding, the windows, the ductwork, everything in that house, and make sure that it all works. If it's not, they're going to give you a report and says this is deficient and this is what the issue is. A big thing down here in Houston is it gets really hot. So if the AC is not cooling between 15 degrees and 20 degrees, then that's definitely going to be noted. I swear I see that all the time. So it's the inspector's job to go out there and test out the house and say, hey, you might want to get an AC guy out here to check out the AC and make sure it's totally functioning. And he kind of directs that kind of thing. And typically inspectors will be out there for 2 to 3 hours for a house under 3,000 square feet. The larger it is, the larger it's going to take. And their fees are anywhere from like $300 to about $650, depending on all the different reports that you want them to go through. So the seller concession is the next one. That is when the seller gives a financial contribution to the buyer. That can be a concession towards the buyer's closing cost. I see that a lot with first-time home buyers or people with lower down payments. They will ask the seller to put up to 2 to 3% of the sales price towards closing costs, or they'll put it towards repairs that the buyer can do afterwards. I've seen a lot of people say, oh, $1,500 flooring allowance. That would be an example of that. And the last terminology is a title search. So a lot of people don't really understand the role of the title company in a real estate transaction. So the title company is in charge of going through all the records as far back as they can and making sure that the person who is the seller on the contract is the person who totally owns the property, and they have a 100% ability to sell that property. They're looking for excess heirs, they're looking for breaks in the chain of ownership, anything that could kind of come back and cause issues after closing. So hopefully that is going to help you guys out with some of the brief terminology in real estate. Obviously there's years of terminology that I can go and talk about, but hopefully that'll give you a little bit of insight. That way you can get started on buying your next house. See you guys later.